95.5 R&B and old school for the Lou.
So why did you take up this particular cause? Because you kept seeing it? It was something that you kept seeing it yourself?
I wanted to be a psychologist since I was in the third grade.
I'm talking about this particular with the special education. And when did you get into that?
I wanted to be a psychologist since the third grade. When I came out of undergrad, I started a master's program in clinical psychology. But I couldn't afford it. It was too expensive. So I decided to return to my undergraduate alma mater, Millersville University.
Okay.
They had a school psychology program. And the director at Heinemann's program told me that if you're going to go back to Millersville, you should look into school psychology with your background, because even if you get your doctorate, you cannot evaluate for special ed disabilities if you don't have that certification.
Okay.
So it was curiosity that led me to school psychology. I was purely clinical. But I'm glad I did, because in becoming a school psych, I came face to face with how special ed and ADHD were being used as the major pieces of the school to prison pipeline. It is the school to prison pipeline. The school to prison pipeline is special ed, because once you get put in special ed, you are not likely to graduate on grade level. And if a black boy can't read by the time he finishes the 5th grade, there's an 85% chance that he will never learn how. What is the average reading level of black men in prison? The average reading level of black men in America's prisons, 3rd grade.
Dr. Umar, we have a question.
Okay.
Sure. And the question is, how is Ritalin used in the prisons?
Ritalin is not generally prescribed in a prison because it is a child psychiatric medicine. So it's normally for school-age children. However, prisoners are at particular susceptibility to be over-medicated. Why? Anyone who's a ward of the state can be over-prescribed medicine because they have no one outside of the system to advocate for them. So, for example, children who are adopted, especially children who are adjudicated, foster children, they get the most prescriptions of all. The drug companies just dump on them because they don't have no mom, no family to say, you're not going to drug them up like that. So once you become a ward of the system, the medication intensifies.
Are you saying that ADHD is used to discipline your children?
I would say ADHD is taking the place of the daddy in the home. Whereas the daddy was the disciplinarian, we now send the children to the doctor. So the daddy ain't there. So the pill is almost like a whipping in a bottle.
And I would say that I agree. I saw this 20 years ago when I worked at the Housing Authority in St. Louis City. And back then, obviously, I processed people for Section 8 housing. I was a caseworker. And a lot of the women would come in. And this was a sector of the community. I didn't grow up like that. I didn't, so I became aware that something was going on. I was like, all of their kids are on SSI. I didn't understand the women who were getting AFDC.
Yes.
They were getting Section 8. Obviously, they were on food stamps. And then this SSI thing, I didn't even know what it was. That was the first time I even heard those words. And I was like, well, why are their children getting SSI? And they were, because he's been diagnosed with ADHD or he has ADD. And I was just like, wow, so you get a check? And then I realized that this was a system. And I was just like, man, just like when I was a senior in high school, I realized that prison was the new slavery. It was just like, and I would say these things and people would look at me, my peers would look at me like I was absolutely insane. But I was a young adult when I worked at Section 8. So I knew then that something just quite wasn't right. And that I knew that black women were being taken advantage of and that their children were being taken advantage of. And obviously this was a time here in St. Louis where crack was very prevalent. And it's just been a shame that we've not been more educated and we've not seeked out the knowledge. And I appreciate people like you who are willing to point it out. And like you said, but you've met resistance. So I'm sure it's people watching now just like, no.
Well, denial is the first symptom of mental illness. Somebody comes in, they're addicted to cocaine, you got to get them to admit they're addicted. They're going to push. Everything's denial.
Right.
You follow me? So parents are going to push. But to be honest with you, I don't really get a lot of pushback from parents because they see it. They come to me looking for the solution.
So how do we stop it?
It's normally members of the black bourgeoisie. White folks don't mess with me too much either because they know that I know my stuff. So it don't really come from white. It comes from gatekeeping Negroes. For example, your son is at a school with a black principal. The black principal is the reason your son got diagnosed with emotional disturbance in the first place. I'm telling you that your son was misdiagnosed. So you have to go to the black principal who grew up in the same neighborhood your son come from and say, my son should have never been given this label. So now Dr. Umar got to fight the principal because the principal just been exposed as a gatekeeper. Now, let's be clear. This whole school to prison pipeline is maintained by black folks. It's created by whites, but it's maintained by us.
From the Department of Education.
Most of the time I'm fighting, I don't fight white principals. They don't even bother to fight, give him what he wants. I got to fight Negroes. They're the ones giving our children felling march. They're the ones suspending the kids every other day. They're the ones sending them to these juvenile delinquency centers. It's them.